my name is Sixo, but more on that later, as right now it's new masterpiece time, baby. Let's check it out. MP-52 is the latest TakaraTomy Masterpiece figure, and sees them kicking off a third round of high-end Decepticon Seeker toys, beginning with Air Commander Starscream. Despite the character having already been released as both MP3 and MP11, this is quite a different take today, with Starscream brought to life in much more animation-accurate style than ever before. Starscream is of course a mainstay of Transformers fiction. He's the ultimate backstabbing, treacherous turncoat, always waiting to put the boot in whenever Megatron is down.
How do you feel, mighty Megatron?
The character is one of the most iconic parts of the franchise as a whole, with his death scene in the 1986 movie remaining particularly memorable. Still, it's the living interpretation that we're looking at today, and whilst the idea of a third attempt initially filled me with dread, I'm surprisingly up for it now that he's actually here. Last thing before we begin, today's review comes courtesy of TF Source, so you'll find a link to their site in the video description below. The plan for today is to give you my first impressions before getting a full photo review up on their blog soon. So here is MP-52 in his box, but before we get to that, it would really help me out if you could leave a like for this video, and maybe even subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. You'll also find a link to my Patreon in the video description, where in exchange for your support you'll receive a ton of perks, such as weekly exclusive galleries, an extensive library of my past photos, and early access to videos such as this. Alternatively, you can support me by checking out my shop, which features a huge range of designs across a wide variety of different products, including clothing, stationery, mugs, phone cases and homewares. I'm uploading new designs all the time, so be sure to check it out to get kitted out. And now here is Starscream in his box, and of course it's been a while since we've had a full-on TakaraTomy Masterpiece effort in this size that wasn't a repaint, so that's exciting if nothing else. And I can't believe that we're at MP-52 either, that's gone by quick, hasn't it? Now, as I say, I was initially dreading the idea of another set of Masterpiece Seekers, but actually I'm really looking forward to this one today, so I can't wait to get that box open. The packaging itself is looking nice enough. It's your typical Masterpiece fare with exactly what you'd expect on the front, and with loads of nice pictures and a good overview of his various gimmicks and accessories presented on the back. And whilst I'm always impressed with the consistency of Masterpiece packaging, it's ultimately the toy itself that I'm most excited about. So let's cut that tape, get that clamshell out of there, and see what it's all about. Now, the toy comes in a single layer clamshell with loads of the smaller accessories, but then underneath you get a little baggie with the flight stand pieces in there, which is all secured with a piece of cord in a rather unusual twist. Then it's just a question of popping that clamshell open and making sure that you don't forget any of his accessories in the process, because there is a fair amount in the box with this one. First up, you get his rather familiar set of null rays. Then you get this little Megatron handgun, which is kind of cool as we haven't seen one of those in the Masterpiece line in a while. You get a set of blast effect pieces for use with his various weapons, and a second set of pieces which can be used for his vehicle mode thrusters. You get these little doodads, all of which reference particular scenes from the cartoon. You get a whole array of additional swap out faces, so we'll be sure to check those out shortly. And then of course you get these bits, which once assembled will make up a rather sizable flight stand. Not to mention a character card if you're into that kind of thing, and a set of instructions which seem to go on forever, so that's a little bit daunting to say the least. And finally there's the toy itself, although before you can really get to grips with it, you're going to want to remove those plastic protection pieces included in the box. Then you're going to want to equip him with his weapons, and these are really rather clever, as although they initially look more like the null rays for Starscream's robot form, they can quickly transform into missiles more befitting the jet mode. Then they peg into the panels on the side and clip in underneath the wings, feeling very secure once they're in place, even if the result is perhaps a little untidy to look at. Still, the plus side is that they then don't need to be removed for transformation, so that's pretty neat. Next, you're going to want to unfold his landing gear so that he can stand in plane mode, and there's one wheel at the front and two at the back, although I did find that these are not very easy to get out and actually required the help of a small tool. Once you've done all of that though, the jet mode is ready for inspection, and my word, it looks very handsome indeed. First thing to note is that this thing looks super sleek and feels very premium in hand too. It's got a really lovely finish and is painted over the whole body for the most part, including the grey. It appears to be a relatively light coat and quite durable, so I don't have any immediate concerns about paint chipping, although of course I'm still going to be careful with it as I go. You'll also note a couple of unpainted sections in the joints, particularly on the red intakes at the front, although I personally think it's a good idea in terms of durability, and it doesn't impede the nice finish at all. I also love the colours on MP-52. It's very vibrant with a really nice popping red, really striking blue, and ultimately a much darker and warmer grey than previous Masterpiece attempts at Starscream. If anything, it brings this figure closer to the animation source, but also the G1 toy in many ways. And whilst the intention here is clearly to swing towards that cartoon vibe, it's still worth noting how much wonderful real-world detail this thing can boast. It's maybe not up there with the likes of MP3 in that regard, but it's still a bit of a stunner all the same. I will say that it definitely benefits from a top-down view, as the underneath is really rather kibbly as you might expect, with the biggest offender here being the one main panel that becomes the robot mode back, in that it doesn't really peg into anything and consequently feels a little bit obtrusive. There is a tiny whiff of kibble to be observed from some side angles too, but on the whole I really don't think it's all that bad. Certainly not much more than MP11 anyway. Generally speaking, I think that MP-52 looks really rather spectacular. That includes a surprising amount of moulded detail all over the jet mode, including a lot more real-world touches than I might have anticipated. There are a couple of noticeable seams where clearly the thing transforms, but honestly, I don't think it detracts at all. There are also a lot of touches that bring it yet closer to the cartoon, not least of which are the two darker grey squares on the top, just like on the animation model. It might seem like a small point, but these things don't go unnoticed. Equally, you have some very anime-styled Decepticon logos on his wings, which I'm sure aren't going to be to everyone's tastes, but it's certainly a look. As I already mentioned, I love the blue on the rear fins, which again looks very cartoony, and the fins themselves feel maybe a bit sturdier than on previous Masterpiece iterations of this character, so that's a big plus. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention how gorgeous the cockpit section is, and I absolutely love the clear plastic orange that they've gone with, and the paint looks fantastic too. Overall, it really shines and again looks surprisingly real world to my eye. Of course, there's a bit of gimmickry to be had here too, as the cockpit flips open to reveal a little purple seat inside, which looks rather nifty. Now, despite me trying with various options to see which miniature size figures might fit best inside there, it wasn't until I came to TakaraTomy's own Diaclone Dianauts that I realised they are literally the perfect fit. So much so that you can even close the cockpit on them, and honestly, he looks absolutely spot on in there. It's times like this that I'm so happy I held on to a few of those Dianauts, just because you never know when they might come in handy. Then there's a tad more functionality in the nose cone, as you can flip it open to reveal that real world detailing inside, which does bizarrely harken back to both MP3 and MP11, but it's quite nicely painted all the same. Next, you can go ahead and add those blast effect pieces onto the rear thrusters, and I have to say that looks really quite cool overall and certainly gives the right animation vibes as well. Then you can even add the Megatron gun onto the bottom of his jet mode by pegging it into that main panel, and that looks really good too and is another nice nod to the cartoon. Kind of ridiculous, but that's Generation 1 for you. Then it's time to get him displayed on the included stand, and this is rather clever in that it snaps together very easily from 3 separate parts, and is then highly adjustable, meaning that you can tailor it to whatever height you might want it to be. Now, you actually place Starscream on there by using this little clear plastic adapter, but I have to say I found this a real mare to actually get pegged into the underneath section of the jet mode. Try as I might, I just couldn't get it to go in until suddenly it did. Through no real skill of my own, I have to be honest. Anyway, now that it's in there, it all feels very secure and it enables you to actually peg Starscream on top of the stand. And here we are, and whilst I will say that it's perhaps not the kind of solution I will personally use all of the time, it does look pretty swish all the same, and I can imagine it will be quite the sight once you have all 3 of the new Masterpiece Seekers lined up together. It's worth mentioning that the stand didn't feel completely secure to begin with, but once I'd tightened up a few of the screws a little, it seemed much better and it appears to be absolutely fine now in that regard. As I mentioned, it is highly adjustable and even enables you to tilt the jet mode from side to side, which is kind of cool and allows for some decent display options. Ultimately, it's when he's soaring through the air that MP-52 feels at his finest, and I think it really shows off his jet mode for all it's worth. Honestly, I was fully expecting this form to have a significant dose of compromise, as though TakaraTomy might have heavily prioritised the robot mode, so I was pleasantly surprised to see that that's not the case. I was only just recently checking out the MP11 mould in jet mode again, and I have to say that I don't think this feels any worse than that when it comes to kibble or compromise or any of that kind of stuff. So I actually think that they've done a remarkable job with it on the whole here. And yes, there's some robot mode guff on the underneath, but honestly the finish, the colours, the proportions, the sculpt, all of it, I think it looks superb, and I'm very happy so far overall. It also shakes up very nicely next to a couple of other Masterpiece jet modes. First up, we've got the MP3 mold with MP3G Ghost Starscream, a toy that I don't believe I'll ever part ways with given how stunning it is, and I do think that these two look really rather good together. In terms of other Masterpiece figures, here we have him with MP MP-25 tracks, showing you just how large Starscream is in jet mode versus your average Masterpiece carbot at least. Then we have MP-52 with the Generation 1 Starscream figure, and you can see what I mean about those colours, particularly that darker grey. It'll be interesting to see if TakaraTomy ever give us a G1 toy repaint as well. And then here we have him with one of the third-party attempts at the Sixo mold. This of course is Make Toys Lightning, their Thundercracker, and whilst they're both really spectacular toys and I do love the unofficial effort quite a bit, it's hard not to be wowed by the amazing finish on TakaraTomy's figure. Ultimately, whichever you prefer, there's now plenty of choice out there when it comes to your Masterpiece seekers. Whether that's one of the many official toys that have been released over the years, or any of the unofficial efforts that we're now seeing. Options are never a bad thing, after all. For my part though, I'm pretty impressed with what I've seen so far of MP-52, but that's only part of the story, so let's go ahead and check out that first transformation. Yes, we'll pause it there because believe it or not, this halfway converted mode is indeed an official transformation of this toy, as dictated by the instructions. And as I'm sure a lot of people will know, this idea of a jet with limbs is commonly referred to as a gerwalk mode, a term mostly associated with the popular Macross franchise where it stands for Ground Effective Reinforcement of Winged Armament with Locomotive Knee Joint, as if you had to ask. The big difference here though is that technically a true gerwalk form would feature a set of arms as well, whereas MP-52 is all about the legs in this case. Still though, this mode does have precedent in Transformers, as it popped up at least a few times in the Generation 1 cartoon, typically with the Seekers dropping in to attack the Autobots from the air. To my knowledge though, this might be the first Starscream toy to attempt to replicate such a thing officially, even if plenty of other examples from over the years can achieve it through a simple half transformation. In this case it's a bit of fun, but also does look surprisingly good on the whole, with the rear fins and entire back assembly slotting in very neatly under the wings in a bit of clever engineering. On the whole, I'd maybe file this one away as being a rather elaborate gimmick as opposed to a third mode proper of any kind, but still it's another aspect of MP-52 to enjoy and a decent attempt to bring this fan favourite element to toy form, so for that I appreciate it. That said, let's pick up where we left off with the rest of the transformation. With transformation done, you can finally step back and appreciate Air Commander Starscream in all his glory. And what can I say except wow, TakaraTomy have really done an amazing job with this one. In terms of the rest of the transformation, the first thing to say is that it's really not as bad as I thought it was going to be from the size of those instructions. In fact, whilst it's still complex, it remains firmly on the side of being enjoyable in my opinion, mostly because of how gracefully all of the various parts move throughout the process, and how well everything clips together come the end result. Realistically, I'm sure it's a conversion that won't be for everyone, but for my money, these kind of toys being complex and yet somehow still entertaining is something that TakaraTomy managed to achieve consistently better than any of their unofficial rivals. And in this case, I found that there really weren't any durability concerns to be had either. At no point did I worry that the plastic was being stressed or that paint was going to be chipped, allowing me to really sit back and enjoy some top-tier toy engineering in all its glory. And as I say, the form it leaves you with is no slouch either, as Starscream's classic G1 cartoon portrayal has never been done more justice in toy form. Every inch of this thing looks spot on to the animation, with an amazing attention to detail being applied to achieve a very simplified look, realistically speaking. I say that as so much of MP-52 is very smooth, with a purposeful lack of moulded features or greebles and some very curved angles on lots of areas of the body. That's similarly true on features such as the hands, which again are suitably rounded and anime styled, capturing quite a bit of expressive charm into the mix. The anime style extends to the proportions, as like MP-36 Megatron and MP-44 Convoy, Starscream is rather long of leg with some high-waisted hips and sizable feet. Even a rear view of the toy will show you that considerable effort has been made to replicate the on-screen appearance from all angles, with the large panel from the bottom of the jet mode now in prime position to achieve just such a result. As with the jet form, the colour scheme once again does a lot of the heavy lifting here, with the warm greys really helping to make MP-52's robot form feel quite visually appealing, all punctuated well by those vibrant red and blue sections. Then you have the head sculpt, which, perfection alert, might be one of the best face designs I've seen on any Transformers toy in recent memory. To my eye, it captures the character so incredibly well that it's hard to imagine another attempt besting this one. I can genuinely hear Chris Latter's voice as soon as I look at it.
Do I hear a second on that?
Ultimately, I'm sure that the uber-toony appearance isn't going to be for everyone, but I couldn't be happier with the look that TakaraTomy have opted for here, especially as it sets it firmly apart from previous Masterpiece attempts at the same character. I know I said before that I've been dreading the idea of another Masterpiece Seeker mold, but boy, seeing this thing in front of me now, I genuinely couldn't be happier for how it worked out. It also feels like an exceptionally well-made product in hand, with a beautiful finish, sturdy materials and solid joints for the most part. There is definitely way too much give in the ankles unfortunately, meaning that you will need to be careful with how you pose MP-52 on occasion, but fortunately every other joint is absolutely spot on. In terms of articulation, Starscream is quite well served, with an impressive array of movement found in the upper body. As with other recent Masterpiece toys, the arms boast butterfly joints at the shoulders, and the wrists can be bent back and forward too for a bit of extra expressiveness. The legs are similarly fluid, with both the hips and knees able to achieve an excellent range and allowing for some dynamic poses. I'm also pleased to finally see proper ankle tilt on a Masterpiece Seeker mold after all these years. Perhaps the biggest controversy here is that although MP-52 does have an ab crunch, there's no waist swivel of any kind, something that has caused a bit of comment online. Personally, it doesn't bother me all that much, as the toy does so much other stuff right that you don't think about it very often, and at least it avoids the issue of having to split the chest cockpit in half for rotation, a solution you see on the third-party attempts at the character so far, and one I'm not very keen on. That chest cockpit is the other part of the toy that has raised a few eyebrows though, as it's actually a fake piece with the equivalent part from the jet form rotating around behind it. I've seen a fair few people critiquing this solution for one reason or another, but for my part, I think it's exceptionally clever toy engineering and delivers exactly the result you'd want for this figure to be accurate to the source. So, whatevs. Besides, overall MP-52 is such a stunner and so much fun to handle that honestly, these kinds of nitpicks don't really register once you get your mitts on it. There's more enjoyment to be had though, as the toy is loaded with gimmicks. First up, you get some integrated boob missiles, just as were found on both MP3 and MP11, recalling a scene from Season 1's Fire on the Mountain. Weirdly, this gimmick isn't even in MP-52's instructions. Next, you have a drill accessory that can be tabbed onto Starscream's wrist if you fold away his hand, replicating a scene from the second season's episode, The Core. Similarly, there's a claw attachment for the wrist too, which can then be used to hold the small rock accessory included here. Both of these are a homage to the episode Cosmic Rust, as Starscream helps to remove a piece of asteroid from Megatron's shoulder. Speaking of Megatron, he forms the next gimmick on offer in the form of that mini handgun, which can be tabbed into Starscream's palms in a similar fashion seen throughout the cartoon and indeed the 1986 movie. It looks really quite impressive when secured in place, and is perhaps one of my favourite inclusions here overall. You can then add some of those blast effect pieces to the end, which again do a very good job at bringing the look of the gun from the cartoon to life. There are 3 different options available for this, so plenty of choice too. Equally, if you decide that you're done with the Megatron gun for a bit, you can always stow it away on Starscream's back should you absolutely wish. If you prefer, then you could even pop one or both of the null rays into Starscream's hand for a spot of armament instead, simply by folding out a little handle on the end and pegging them into his palms. This solution has caused a bit of confusion online, but again, it's another clear cartoon nod, this time referencing the Seeker's very first appearance on Cybertron in the pilot episode where they used their null rays in this fashion. Of course, the blast effect pieces go well with the null rays too, whether you choose to use them in his hands or mounted on his arms for a more typical look. Then we come to the swappable faces, which are very easily removed and replaced via a simple peg mechanism in the head sculpt. Alongside the default face you have 5 other options, including an evil smile, an even bigger smile, a look of horror stroke disgust I suppose, and well, whatever this one is, sheer delight I guess? And naturally the trademark Starscream smirk, which looks about as perfect as you'd hope it would, and once again makes this toy feel like TakaraTomy ripped it right from the screen. Overall, it's a neat bag of tricks and does a good job at enhancing the play value of this toy, not to mention bringing various scenes from the cartoon to life. Naturally, you get a similar effect just by comparing this toy to other recent Masterpiece releases, particularly the likes of MP-52 Megatron, where it's no surprise that the two of them go together rather perfectly, as much as either of them would likely hate to admit it. The same is true with examples such as MP-13 Soundwave or MP-29 Laserwave, with this new Starscream feeling suitably cartoon accurate enough to finally fit seamlessly alongside them in your Masterpiece Decepticon ranks. He looks equally good next to a number of Masterpiece Autobots, although again he better fits the more toon-centric aesthetic of more recent examples, such as Hound and Sunstreaker if anything. Really though, the main comparison that proves interesting today is with other interpretations of the Seeker design, including previous toys from TakaraTomy themselves, lining MP-52 up next to examples of both the MP3 and the MP11 molds shows just how different this new release is in terms of the look it's going for. And although of course there's an eye the beholder factor to consider here, I don't think it's much of a reach to say that this newest effort is the most visually appealing overall. Although again, your mileage may vary depending on how much you like the cartoon style it evokes. Similarly, it stacks up nicely next to Make Toys Meteor, which up until now has been a lot of people's go-to cartoon-styled Masterpiece Starscream stand-in. Now I'm a big fan of Meteor myself, but I don't have much hesitation in saying that MP-52 nails the look and the design here in a way that the unofficial effort can't quite claim to the same degree. Still, Meteor has just been reissued and is currently retailing for a fraction of the rather whopping price being sought for MP-52, so perhaps that's the deciding factor for you. Equally, there's further competition in the offing now with the new Deformation Space Crimson Wings figure looking to steal MP-52's crown. One to judge another day, I suppose. For now though, I couldn't be more enamoured with the new Masterpiece Starscream, in all honesty. It's gone from being something that I groaned about when I first heard of it to being a toy that I just can't get enough of. So much so that I'm now eager to get Masterpiece Thundercracker in hand too. The price may be a sticking point for some, but what can I say, as soon as you have a go on this thing you're unlikely to be disappointed. It's a very strong toot. Now, as I mentioned, this review comes courtesy of TF Source. You'll find a link to their site in the video description below. I'll also put a link to both my Patreon and my Redbubble store so you can check those out to get sorted for perks and merch. Finally, I'd love it if you could drop me a like for today's video and maybe let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you like what you see on MP-52 or not so sure? Otherwise, that's it from me, so have a great rest of your day and TTFN.